The moment has come to share my vision of the future that awaits if we do not rise up and take our rightful place in the world.
This movie is supposed to take place in the early 30s or late 20s. So after World War I, but before World War II.
That is what we are fighting. That is the enemy. Their arrogance. Their power lust. Their barbarity. How long will it take before they turn their weapons on us?
Do nothing when I speak of this. You must remain calm and contain your emotions. There are orders here among us.
And over the whole world goes a clamor to start with joy. World War.
Sorry. So, well, if you're not familiar with that at all, Grindelwald is a kind of like Harry Potter, right? You know, so if you saw the Harry Potter movies, you know, there's like some people that are magic folk, and then there are the folks that are non-magic folk, the muggles, the nomage, right? You know, all the things you said. So basically, there's this conflict between the establishment that says we should all, you know, muggles should never know that we exist because then they'll want to destroy us. So we should just kind of live quietly, you know, in hidden, you know, etc. And Grindelwald wants to turn that over and let the magician, you know, the magic folk be in charge of everything, right? And so he's fighting the others that want to keep it all a secret, etc. And so that's what sets that all up. But clearly, what you can see is there's this conflict between the idea that there's one class of folks, the Ubermensch, basically, the magic folk, right, that have certain powers that he says it blooms in only a small group of that's Johnny Depp, by the way, doing the role. So basically what I interpret is the conflict that was not only there in the Harry Potter series, but is in this one as well, and that is J.K. Rowling's class argument against her English, British traditions, where and it's still there right now. When you look at Boris Johnson and the way people are complaining about him and the conflict between the Tories and the Whigs in Parliament, and you know he's the current Prime Minister. You know he's trying to do the people's will, but he himself is upper class. He was a fellow student at Eton and Oxford, along with Cameron. Yeah, the previous prime minister. They're buds, you know, but they're upper class. You know, he's always had lots of wealth. He's never had to, you know, live, you know, worry about, the Muggle life. He's always been upper class. So that's a real British issue. That's our issue too. We have the same. Yes, Doug.
You think it sounds a little Marxian? The way
What do you-
the movie?
Yeah,
about
well-
class struggles, the bourgeois, you know, and,
Well, there are class struggles.
right.
And,
That's
and
what
that
this whole
doesn't
argument-
necessarily have to be Marxian in the sense that you think a communist society will evolve and, you know, that will be better, right? You don't have to think
Oh,
that way.
I'm just hearing some rings of a
Oh, yeah,
similarity.
yeah, well,
Not, that's what it is.
I think a lot of Marxist elements, not communist elements, but Marxist philosophy, is, sociology is Marxist, basically. It's based on studying classes and so on. You know, so if you're reading sociological reports, I just read some on suicide just yesterday, and you know it's talking about groups in exactly the same way that Karl Marx originally framed it. So a lot of that kind of conflict and so on among classes is definitely
Only going on since the beginning of civilization.
yeah.
I don't have a broad base in history, but it does remind me, based on the elements I do recognize from the history of Germany and Hitler, of the cult of personality and speaking to the emotions of a people who feel like they're under threat, manipulating those emotions to weaponize the emotions, bring them to violent action against something else. And in this instance, it's the majority. He's taking a minority of people and saying that their livelihood, their existence is threatened by a majority of people, even though they're more powerful because they have magic. And so that reminds me of Hitler. Like, Germany was in a fragile position as far as their identity and who they were, and he took advantage of that fragile identity and said that that's under further threat. You need to band together. You need to come together, and this is the threat. These people over here, and your only chance is to be violent against them and get rid of them. So those
For
are
the
the
greater good.
similarities. Right, for the greater
For the
good.
greater good.
And those are the similarities that I'm picking up from here.
Yeah, oh, it's fascinating to look at it that way and to realize that, of course, rolling continues to be quite a significant player in the media, in the way our kids are growing up and looking at this stuff. Remember, everyone was supposed to be encouraging their kids to read by reading the Harry Potter series. It's kind of interesting, some of the like Harold Bloom argues that was actually devastating to American literature development and kids' reading abilities, because the books were not nearly as powerful as the traditional literature that they should have been reading instead. It's kind of interesting. Like Shakespeare. Remember, everyone knows who Harry Potter is, yes? But when I asked how many of you are familiar with the play King Lear, no one raised their hand, as I recall. So it's kind of interesting. Yes? Well, yeah, you have a beard,
I've got
so
gray hair.
you know.
You
You know.
They had us read that kind of stuff.
I had to read Shakespeare. I had 2 courses in Shakespeare in college. The comedies and the other plays, history and tragedies, you know, but, and then did my best to join a group of professors here at UAA that wanted all of our students to read all of Shakespeare as well, and even spent time in hotels sitting up at 11 o'clock at night reading Shakespeare with some students in Washington DC, you know, which was, you know, it was actually a lot of fun. It was also tiresome, but so that and Jane Austen, and I really didn't like reading Jane Austen, but we had to read every single Jane Austen novel. Have you ever read anyone know who Jane Austen is? Yes? Cool, yeah. But can you imagine? That's torturous to make people read all of her novels. That's just, thank goodness we didn't have to do Emily Bronte. You know? I remember in high school, we had to read The Way of All Flesh by Samuel Butler. And it was so difficult that Mr. Foley, our teacher, finally at a certain point said, okay, forget it. And he started reading summaries of, you know, the whatever those notes are called, cliff notes, for us, so that we would be able to pass the test. But we didn't expect us to actually read The Way of All Flesh. By the way, if as an adult you read The Way of All Flesh, you realize, oh my, it is absolutely a powerful, powerful book. But as a teenager, it isn't at all sensible. But as an adult looking back, my goodness, you realize this is a tremendous novel. Okay, so Nietzsche. Übermensch. We still have people that claim to be Übermenschen. That's kind of interesting. I think some movies even use that as a motif, right? Are you familiar with some of that? Not only things like X-Men and stuff, but there were movies where they claim to be Nietzscheans. Does that make sense? Did you ever hear them use that in any of the movies you saw? Star Trek had one set of movies where Khan was like the head of a group of Nietzscheans that were super beings that, you know, wanted, you know, so there's that so we get this motif that you can see playing. So that's intriguing. But if we really want to understand Nietzsche, it's not significant powers that individuals have, like turning into Wolverines and things, you know, with claws, which strikes me as that would be really difficult to eat breakfast with all those claws and stuff. You know, sorry, that's just silly stuff. But for Nietzsche, what made you an Übermensch was your mind going through levels of education that enabled you to be self-reflective and realize that what our operating system enables us to run these programs that basically enable us to believe that we're playing this particular linguistic game, that it's real, right? But to go beyond that and realize that these meta-narratives are man-made games that we have created. We can have competing games that you like to play, right? Some that are better than others, that enable us to achieve goals that are better than others, right? But at the same time, when you get right down to it, they're all man-made narratives. Why I'm even going up in the air as I'm thinking of them, right? But the narrative that's most important is realizing that we are the ones that make these narratives. They're man-made. And the Übermensch is the person that now controls the creation of these narratives and then uses them in order to manipulate everyone else. That's the Übermensch, the one that creates the story, you know, and gets the whole population out there doing something and responds to their imaginary idea of what we're doing, right? Or art, you know, an artist that creates something that people will spend $1 million for, even though it's a pile of crap, right? We have one of these right at UAA, of course. This is not Oppenheimer, but Oppenheim, and it's called Image. Didn't I show it already?
I feel like we've crowdsourced the Übermensch with social media. We don't even need one person controlling a narrative. We just kind of coalesce through the interconnectivity.
You're still competing, though.
Yeah.
Madonna, the singer, right? has, by the way, if you look up Madonna in the encyclopedia, she comes up first. When I was a kid, if you looked up Madonna, it was the Madonna and Child, would be the mother of Christ, right? That would have been the first one you would, but now Madonna, the singer, comes up. Have you seen this? This is at UAA, right? This is on the lawn, right at the corner in between the admin building and the art building. In fact, as you look out the philosophy department second story windows, that's what you see. And that costs $500,000 to put there for the materials. So I understand that Oppenheim did not actually take any money for it. So he didn't receive money for it. But if you look up Oppenheim, these are other artist renditions that he made, and so on. Here he is. He's dead now, but if you look on Oppenheim's site, it's hundreds of art creations, some huge, all over the place. He made a fortune making these, but none of them strike me as and that's part of the shtick too. You have to look like that, right? You know, you have to look sort of like Einstein almost. But yeah, if you look at the different installations, well, the power, the meaningfulness in his life was not so much creating the art, but persuading people to believe that it was art. Right? In other words, having that power over the others that are out there, right?
The non-artistes.
Yeah, yeah. Now,
No drugs.
the thing is, you can, I mean, you know, when I ask people about that art, you know, and stuff, ask what do you think it means, you know, and they look at it and they think it looks like a pile of junk. And that's our initial sense, right, that it's just junk. Same thing with a lot of other art. Remember, if you read Sir Roger Scruton, or watched Sir Roger Scruton's video talking about kitsch, right, the faking it, right, you know, all that art, you know, and then the critics get in on it, you know, and say how wonderful it is, and you know, everybody's all in this happy, you know, fraud, you know, together, you know, and that they persuade people to believe that it is great art, right, you know, and spend lots of money on it, and people really do. But what Nietzsche argues is it's the persuasion, it's what gives you, in a world where there is no real meaning, kind of Schopenhauer, remember how depressing Schopenhauer was, right? You know, but for Nietzsche, it's the will to power, to have that power over others by being this Übermensch to yourself. You've evolved mentally to the point where you now understand what makes human beings tick, so that you can manipulate that set of meta-narratives to persuade them to do what you want them to do, right? So you're the one with the strings, making society do things, and that's going to give your life meaning, because you're the one in charge of things. You're the one doing things, right? You see how that works? Is that scary or what? You know, especially if you think, well, is that the way the WTO, the World Trade Organization works? You know, the folks that all get together and, you know, decide, you know, what the economy's going to do, where money should go, and you know, are they, you know, 500 or so people, you know, running things, you know, or, you know, are they the Übermenschen, you know, that are up there doing things? Is this their philosophy? Maybe they know, okay, global warming is going to change all this stuff, but we don't want people panicking, so we'll deny it. You know, who knows? Maybe that's all being manipulated. So, a couple other interesting things associated with him. One of them is the eternal recurrence. And I really confused exactly about what that could mean. To me, what it really meant was that because the science, even in his day, was convincing people that there was kind of all time existed at once, but that it might actually repeat itself, but that it repeats itself exactly the way it already happened. So basically your life will infinitely repeat itself. But everything you do will essentially, has to be exactly the same. You know, in a sense, all of time exists at once. Remember, that's when we think of Einstein's cone. Or light cone. Right, however you look at this, even if you look at the one where there's like all these little light cones, you know, flowing around, right? All of time exists at once. We might be moving along the trajectory of time in the direction of entropy, right? But all the past is already here, all the future is actually already there. So everything in time, remember like that little DVD that was Brian Greene talked about in The Fabric of the Cosmos, that little DVD of the movie Gone with the Wind, right? All of it's all there. You put it in the DVD player and you can play, it makes it look like it goes from start to finish, but it's actually all there at once already. So if you think that way, life is eternal, every moment is eternal, and in a sense, that's kind of one interpretation of the eternal recurrence. But there are other folks that interpret his eternal recurrence in a different way. But that's my best shot at that. And in the text, he talks about how would you feel if what you did right now was what you always would do over and over again? You know, so it gives added emphasis to the moral import of what your choices are. Because if you do something horrible, you know, and try to persuade a foreign president, you know, to use his power to research stuff that Vice President Biden's son was doing or something, you know, if that's evil and you're trying to do that, you know, you shouldn't do, you know, so was Vice President Biden and or his son basically trying to encourage a foreign government to investigate something, and then Trump comes into that same government and tries to get them to investigate something? Now we have our Congress going to them to investigate what President Trump was doing, and by the way, the news media are all going to the same people to investigate what the Congress is investigating, to investigate Trump, investigating Biden. And all of that is wrong. That's just, I think, stupid. I mean, I watch foreign news. Are they trying to manipulate are they Ubermenschen trying to manipulate my thinking? Absolutely. I'd be dumb for not realizing that that's what they're trying to do. Same thing with NBC and CBS. And, you know, they're trying to manipulate me according to what their advertisers want them to manipulate us. You know, Fox News has got a particular agenda too, right? You know, and everybody's interpreting everything else and trying to manipulate the way we view the world. And they're all competing too. which is pretty obvious too. Yes, Tim?
So you're saying that your perspective of Nietzsche's recurring eternity, or what is that called?
Is
Eternal recurrence?
eternal recurrence.
Eternal recurrence is still providing us the expectation that you can change what occurs in
Well,
that
I
loop?
think that's a paradox, because
Right,
on
that's
the
what I
one
was
hand,
thinking.
everything that happens
Has always been.
has already
always
been
will
there.
be.
So this exchange that we had just now has been waiting since
Right.
the dinosaurs. It's already been there, waiting, and by the way, and the idea of it being eternally recurrent is because, when you think of the universe, in the Einsteinian perspective, the universe is the surface of the balloon that's expanding, right? So that, if I go far enough, I'll see myself, right? Because if you're in a balloon and you go all the way around, I'll come up behind me.
Okay.
You know what I mean, right? So
mean,
all of time is basically just kind of the surface of this expanding balloon. That's this expanding universe, but the surface is basically what's expanding. But we're all within that. So we, if you could go fast enough, you could actually go to some other place in time. So if you go into some kind of time machine, you could actually go somewhere else in time, but it would be exactly as it was always. Lots of paradoxical plays on how that might work.
Especially if you deal with free will. The whole concept of free will creates an interesting debate on that subject.
Absolutely, because
Will send your mind.
it seems like every choice you make is a free choice that you had to make, but it just so happens that it's always been the choice you were going to make.
And is it actually a free
Freely.
choice if you already have it existing in the future?
You could bring that even to a current physics debate, biomechanically. Like our current definition of free will is antiquated. Like we assume that we have a choice over so much and how free will is defined. And free will is so narrowly defined as absolute control over every decision that it's easy to find that we actually don't have free will under that very strict definition.
Yeah,
We
there's
can
different
prove that
var-
there are a huge swath of
Yeah, there's different.
decisions that happen before you become aware of them.
Yeah, there's different definitions of free will. Limited free
Oh
will.
yeah, and lots of games associated with it. St. Augustine, John Calvin,
Yeah.
Presbyterians,
Mhm.
all that. But keep in mind that our current definition of how knowledge works, that seems to work really well, is like Stephen Hawking's concept of model-dependent realism. So it's not like we're getting a grasp of the way the universe really is. Instead, we have these symbolic games or models that have their uses, right? And so we can have multiple games that are all sitting in the closet, and what do you feel like playing tonight? We'll play Clue, But
Just don't play.
if you need the other game in order to accomplish something else, you pull out the other vocabulary, and it's true within that game that, if you get this card, you have to go to jail, right? But, that's Monopoly, not Clue, right? So it's relative to the game you're playing, but there are truths that are absolute within the context of the various games, right? So if you continue to remember to apply that model of models to all of these discussions of say, free will, right? You obviously need one particular way of interpreting free will when it comes to you're driving a truck and not checking the rocks, and some of the rocks fall off of your truck and you kill someone in the car behind you. Right? Even if you're you're 82 years old, and that's sad, you know. You know, that's one type of free will that you should have checked the truck before you left out of Palmer, right? I don't, did you read that? That's really sad. I mean, sad for him, but I mean, sadder for the woman that died in the car behind him, and so on.
Perhaps only more sad for her family. If you die, are you really sad?
Well, I would be pissed off if a rock kicked up by a truck in front of me crashed through my windshield and killed me.
But you
Wait,
don't
when
be
did
pissed
this
off at
happen?
an instant.
Pardon?
When did this happen?
Well, he was on trial for it just yesterday, I
I
guess.
think it happened in 16 or something, or a year or so ago, or, wow.
How old did you say he was?
82. That's frightening. You know, you do your best to live a good life, and maybe you have a good reputation and everything else, and then you're 82 years old and you do something stupid and you've totally ruined all that. You know, it's kind of a shame. I remember the one elderly guy in Florida that was driving his car and crashed into a bus stop full of people and killed about 5 of them. You know, he was in his 90s. And the thing was, he says, but I have to drive, but, you know, not if you're going to kill people.
Usually
Oh.
something you find out about after the fact.
So should we take a break and then move on to St. Anselm? Is that a good thing? Any questions on Nietzsche? He's absolutely fascinating, lots of different ways. Was he a Nazi? Absolutely not. I don't think he was. For one thing, he's clearly not anti-Semitic. In fact, he never even thought of himself as a German. He thought of himself as a European, which is kind of intriguing. But his sister definitely made it out to seem like he was pro-Nazi, pro-Hitler. Yes?
You referenced Stendhal, and just this week I've heard other references of him. Do you know anything about his books or read his
No, I have not read any of his stuff. I don't think so. Name sounds very familiar, but I don't remember. So we'll take 10 minutes or so, is that good?
I am thinking